So the game transposed. There you go. Magnus immediately just plays e4. He's like, okay, I know you're about to play Sicilian. Why should I bother with knight f3? Let me just start with e4.
He does, and we might be seeing the Taimanov Khan that you earlier spoke about. It's your speciality. He starts with the second move, e6. Alireza, I would love to get chat prediction on this point. What do you think will happen in this very important game 4? But let's also point out that whoever loses, it's not the end of the road. They just get knocked down to the loser's bracket. They'll have one more life. And Artez, I know why you had that smile on your face. It's the King's Indian attack.
Yeah, it's the King's Indian attack. I mean, actually, I was wondering, was this a mouse slip? Maybe Magnus wanted to play d4. No. I mean, of course, it's a very, very normal-looking move. The point is, White immediately fixes the center, and there you go. d5 is on the board. So Queen e2. Now, this is one of the trendiest ways to meet so-called closed French defense or the King's Indian attack. And the big idea here is that White wants to play bishop g2, short castle, rook e1. And if Black plays knight f6, bishop e7, and castle short, White closes the king side with a typical e4, e5, and starts a king side attack. Either way, maybe all of that, Tanya, is completely irrelevant, but I think we have a great opportunity here to get an attacking game.
I would love to see that. King's Indian attack used to be once upon a time my favorite opening to pretty much counter every single Sicilian or the French defense. And Alireza chooses a different approach. Instead of taking out the knight to f6, which often provokes that e-pawn moving forward, he develops it to e7, from where it can start targeting that e5 pawn from the square g6. It also vacates instead a different approach of g6, bishop g7 to make sure that the attack on the king side comes to nothing.
This is actually strategically a very provocative move by Firouzja because I get it. So Black plays knight e7 with the idea to position the bishop on g7. So his idea is to slow down White's eventual move e4, e5. So both of the players are perfectly aware of the concept of the nuances of this position. But again, when you think about the position a bit in the longer run, if Magnus is going to manage to play e5, assuming Black castle short, e5, bishop f4, castles, and there's this typical maneuver to bring this knight from b1 all the way to g4. Black eventually is suffering because of those weak and dark squares. But wait a second, Tanya, are you supposed to play e5 that when Black has not castle short? Maybe you can do it, actually.
It feels a bit early. It feels a bit early because now Alireza can delay the shock castle. And very often all the plans that you pointed out for White on the king side, Black starts countering it with his own play on the queen side. You want to go b6, Arthur? I would want to go b5 and try to expand even more on the queen side. Eventually, exactly, push that a pawn, push that b pawn even further. Magnus now wants to make sure that the center remains solid. He plays c3, so he wants to get d4 in as well.
Magnus simply has here different ideas. I'm not really surprised. So I think what he wants to do, he wants to play d4, secure the center. There you go. Alireza immediately plays b5. I think here Alireza is slightly toying with the fire here. So this idea of b5, a5, b4, I think it's very effective with the bishop on f8 here because the bishop is guarding the c5 square. With the bishop on g7, I'm not really sure. I think that here Magnus has a brilliant position here. Plays something like, again, short castle, rook e1, knight e2, knight f1, knight h2, knight g4. But if he castles short, he needs to watch out for the typical idea of g5 and knight g6. And I think, Tanya, this is precisely the reason why Firouzja is delaying the short castle to make sure that he has this opportunity to go for an inspired counterattack.
And Alireza just doesn't care about castling. He doesn't want to let Magnus get everything he wants after he's committed e5 so quickly. So he continues with his own strategy of striking onto the other side of the board. I'm expecting that a pawn to move further down, a4, a3 coming in. Always target the base of the pawn chain. That b2 pawn is where you want to get to. And it just feels like Alireza's play is flowing faster, exactly because of the reason you pointed out, that his king is still in the center. Ironically, the safest place that it can be right now.
I'm still picking White. Maybe I have too much fun for the King's Indian attack systems. I think here Magnus is trying to figure out, can he castle short with the Black King in the center? So maybe he's somewhere here in these lines like short castle. Is this a threat? g5. Is this a threat again? Knight g6, for example, g takes on h6, and whatever happens in these lines. So you have to calculate these lines very carefully, because if you make the wrong decision here, then black suddenly has a very powerful attack at the king side. But I think that short castle here probably is going to be in order at some point. No, he plays a3.
And it again is one of those positions where the players will have to show a lot of accuracy, because we can already see it's heating up in a big way. Alireza is going for activity on the queen side. Magnus is trying to get on to the king side. And we're getting some stats in on Magnus's accuracy in the Julius Baer Generation Cup so far. And listen to this, Arthurs. In round 1 versus Jan Nepomniachtchi, he had an accuracy of over 96%. Then he goes on against Levon Aronian, a match that he won, with an accuracy of almost 93%. And against Alireza, it suddenly takes a drop below 90%. He's at 85% against Alireza. And I think the reason for that is simply the kind of positions that Alireza is able to create. They're so chaotic. They're so incredibly messy. It's that Mikhail Tal's forest of complication where 2 + 2 is equal to 5, and the path out is narrow enough for just one person. So mistakes happen.
Exactly, and I think also this low percentage contributes to those crazy up and down movements of the evaluation bar. In the time scramble, where both players were probably winning at some point, the game 2 in question, I think this is where Magnus lost a lot of his accuracy here. Maybe it doesn't really matter, but yeah, that's what makes chess really exciting. By the way, a4 is a play, Tanya. I really like this move, because here Alireza is bringing queen a5 as a possibility here on the table, hitting the pawn on c3. To be honest, I'm a bit surprised that Magnus is delaying the short castle here, because I can't really imagine why he would want to keep the king in the center. I suppose we'll see. He doesn't like something about this g5. Yeah,
I think it could be around that. You've hit the nail on the head, that if black castles, white gets the attack going. That knight coming on to g4 at the right moment, you go h5 and then sacrifice a piece on the king side. If white castles, black might be the one to attack with his own sacrifice, the g pawn moving forward. So definitely Magnus doesn't want to go in for those complications just yet. But Alireza continues to put the pressure. Bishop from a6 now eyes that d3 pawn as well. I can imagine a scenario where the queen from d8 jumps onto a5. I'm looking at the c3 weakness as well. That feels tender over the next few moves. Are you still sticking with white?
No, I'm not so sure, to be honest, anymore. Yeah, finally, Magnus plays the short castle here. He already decided, okay, whatever. If you want to play g5, fine, I'm going to go with this. But now he has created some weaknesses here. And I think in a nutshell, Tanya, you're not supposed to play at the queen side. At least this is how I treat the king's din attack myself. So you're supposed to go for this king side attack, leave the queen side alone, because black normally is supposed to play the queen side, degenerate any targets. So these are the normal standard practices. But of course, when the best players in the world play, different rules apply. They understand the game a bit better, and the game is very, very concrete.
And because you said the word concrete, and we all know Alireza Firouzja, how creative he can be, always looking for trying to create those imbalances. Right now, he's trying to calculate and think out the move g5. And it doesn't matter what the objective evaluation might be, but I think we have to look at that alternative. He first decides to get the knight to a strong post. But look at the way he hasn't castled, because g5 is definitely on his mind.
Alireza doesn't really like castling, does he now, right? Because he didn't really castle in the second round game. What did he do in the first game? Yeah, he did castle with white, but he's not castling with black. I wonder why.
Well, he's just delaying it. We still might see a castle at some point. But right now, he's played knight f5. g4 is not possible. The queen and the knight are eyeing the h4 pawn. So you really can't kick that knight out. White always has to watch out for a central pawn move, whether it comes in with the c pawn moving forward or the d pawn moving forward. Yes, you're pointing out white's long plan. But others, that's a whole lot of moves to get there.
You're correct, but I don't really see anything else, because again, if you play something like c4 to block the bishop, you give up the d4 square. You can't play b4. The queen is locked by defending the pawn on d3. There's no points here to crash through at the queen side here. So the bishop on g2 stands okay, you could play maybe bishop h3, the bishop on f4 has no moves, the knight on f3 has no moves. So I think simply with the elimination method, the knight on d2 has to go on h2. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see.
It's a great point you make. Improve your worst placed piece. Everything seems beautifully placed, as you pointed out. Get that knight on d2, which doesn't have any future prospects in the center because of that pawn on d5. Get it to the best square. What's the best square? g4. It's a long plan, and Alireza will find a way to get his own counterplay. It might be with a break with the c pawn moving forward, or perhaps a trade along the b file to try to infiltrate on that b3 square at the right moment. Once the knight from d2 moves away, he starts with the trade plan.
Yeah, I started to think actually, Tanya, about this idea because this would be really a throwback to his second round game that he played against Magnus. It featured a pretty similar plan. I mean, knight a5, knight b3. Remember, there was the knight on b3, only the pawn structure was slightly different here. And with the knight on a5, he also would improve his odds of playing c4, then playing knight b3, and hit the pawn on a3 at some point later. Maybe that's the reason why he decided not to castle short just yet. And the more moves are played, I do believe that we are not going to see a short castle from Black's perspective at all.
Maybe there'll be a moment where he decides he needs that final piece, that final toy to come to the nursery. That rook on h8 needs to land on b8 at some moment. He's infiltrated. It's happened, others. Rook on b3. It's not an easy move to answer because you can't really trade it. You can't allow Black to get this super healthy passer on b3. Meanwhile, he's threatening to pick up the a3 pawn as well. Not just that, the queen is about to double up with that rook on b3 from queen b6, asking big questions. How are you responding on the b file?
Yeah, I think here Magnus has just to forget about the pawn on a3 and finally start to do with this some action here the king side with knight h2, knight g4, knight h6. That being said, maybe after knight h2, Black can actually afford to play h5. Now, this is a very risky move, of course, because it weakens a lot of dark squares in the position, but it would also allow Black to completely lock this knight on h2 for white out of the game. So maybe after knight h2, h5, bishop g5, this is a possibility, but then again, what do you do with this knight? Tough questions.
It just seems like Alireza is the one who's coming in with all the tough questions today in this match against Magnus. Every single game. Rook b3, I really like this approach, That knight from d2 moves, what's the drawback of it? The b3 square is weak. And he makes use of it. Magnus goes knight to e3, so he's actually offering a knight trade. And wow, it gets awarded an inaccuracy right now.
Are there some tactical tricks?
Get greedy or no? The computer points out that it's time to go short castle.
All right, yeah, Black now finally took the pawn on a3. Yeah, there was a possibility to castle short. No, now more than ever, I'm convinced that short castle is not going to happen because the king is getting pretty weak there.
But it's a pawn. It's a pawn, and if give Alireza one more move, the rook is coming back to b3. Magnus needs to do something really quickly right now. I mean, this next move is super important for him. And also, he's down on the clock. He's touching the 3-minute mark.
Yeah, I think here Magnus probably is trying to understand, does he really care about the pawn on a4? Okay, the answer is
yes, he does.
Cares. Yes, he does. I was thinking also maybe he could literally not care and instead of this rook a1 play queen d2, try to persuade Black from ever castling short at all. Maybe play d4, bishop f1 and pretend like he is having a material symmetricality and equality on the board. But okay, probably he needs to take care of this pawn on a4. It still doesn't rule out the idea of playing queen d2, hitting the pawn on h6 and maybe then securing the center with something like d4, c4.
Oh, that's a big move. When I see the bar, it shoots up, but it looks like a strong one because, for example, if you were to go d4, then Alireza can just defend that a4 pawn with queen to a5 and bishop b5 and say that I'm a very healthy pawn up. But if not,
there's probably some very concrete problems because the king is weak. The king is not yet castled. That is a good question. There you go. Magnus immediately spots that after c takes on d3, queen a4, because of the spin here, black starts to have some problems. This is a great move. I really like it, Tanya, because bishop b5, I think now here Magnus can actually take on c4. So no longer bishop c4 is going to work. And after bishop b5 takes on c4, takes on c4, I'm seeing all kinds of ideas from d1. And the longer black delays the castle, the less safe the black king is feeling in the center.
It might be time for him to use the next opportunity to go short castle, because that rook from h8, it really needs to come into the game as quickly as possible. But what an amazing find by Magnus. Queen c2 in this moment. Just lose pieces. The bishop on a6, the geometry of the knight on c6. Calculating that you don't want to pick up the a4 pawn with your rook, but you want your queen there instead. That is just an absolute Magnus Carlsen move. Top class chess here.
Indeed, it is. Yeah, so I think here Firouzja is trying to calculate what happens after the forcing move c takes, queen a4, bishop b7. Can he survive this? Can he survive the spin? Because the pawn on d3 indeed is very menacing. So c takes, queen a4, bishop b7, knight e4, queen d7, rook b1, and he's somewhere here. Very scary, but again, chess is very concrete and you can't really trust your opponent. And today, Tanya, we already saw it a couple of times that the players are calling the bluffs of their opponent, especially when Magnus was playing in the very first game, this a5, a4. It took Alireza some time, but he called the bluff. You can't always trust your opponent. You can't take the pawn. And this is what Firouzja is trying to do right now. Big question.
Look at the camera. Look at the players. There's so much reaction coming from both Magnus and Alireza. The one thing that Queen c2 did, it completely threw Alireza off, because we saw a little shake of his head earlier on, a move that he missed when he played c4. And that just changes it, because you're thinking you're up a pawn and you've calculated everything. And look at that, an immediate mistake by him. He goes queen to b6, allowing the move queen takes pawn, which will hit that bishop on a6. I have a bad feeling about that king on e8. We've been singing praises of not going short castle, but suddenly in big danger. Magnus also looked like he was calculating the line through. I'm not sure what's going on, but queen takes pawn looks very obvious.
This is classical mistakes come in pairs, Tanya, here. So you make one mistake, you feel psychologically a bit down, then comes the next mistake here. So bishop a6 here, Firouzja realized he's in trouble. Now he plays queen b6, which is immediately a second mistake. King is in the center. He probably already had to make some very tough decision here. Run away with the king, give up the pawn on a4. Now I think there's most likely some sort of a tactical problem. Yeah, indeed, this queen a4 feels pretty obvious. Queen a4, bishop b5, queen a8 check, king d7. There's got to be some kind of a move. No, just queen a3, stopping black from castling. Short, Magnus says, you are not going to go anywhere. I've got you.
You didn't castle earlier, you're never going to castle now. Queen to a3, taking away that possibility. And if you take on d3, that looks like an incredible pawn. But Magnus wants to switch play then. That rook from a1 is threatening to come on the b file with a deadly pin. Artez, that bishop on b5, super tender. Queen d6, you're pointing out. Rook b1 with the idea bishop f1. Take that pawn on d3. A lot of big threats coming up. And Magnus being super accurate in this one.
Well, I suppose when you're here sitting with black, if you suffer, then you suffer with the music. Just take on d3 and pray it's going to work. Otherwise, it's just such a terrible position here. I don't know what to suggest. Bishop f8 feels super slow here. Probably White's going to play the same idea, Tanya, that you mentioned. Queen b2, pinning the bishop on b5 and the bishop on b6 here. Just take on d3 and then after rook b1, I don't know. Actually, what do you do after rook b1? I'm kind of clueless.
It's very scary, the pin. Because yes, you can play queen to a6, but then you just trade, rook goes to b6, and you end up losing a piece in that line.
Maybe he just lost. Yeah, so
and
right now
Alireza's feeling the pressure. He shakes his head, he's down under a minute. And how quickly did this turn around? He won that pawn on a3, and then one inaccuracy, c4, and Magnus Carlsen is all over him.
Well, Tanya, castling is a good opportunity for a good reason, I think. So you have to bring the king to the safety pretty early in the game. So he kept delaying this decision by bringing the king to the safety, and now he's backfiring at the worst possible moment. What's done is done. If you make such a mistake against the greatest player in the history of chess, these are the consequences.
And Alireza keeps getting more and more frustrated on the camera. He's not able to find his way through, immediately goes... in the end, goes with the idea of bishop f8, a check, the king comes up. But look at the discoordination, that bishop on f8, the rook on h8, not playing a part. Where is the breakthrough? How do you open more files and more lines for activity here? Magnus knows that there has to be a way. He's about to show us.
Yeah, so maybe bishop e3. I think what makes perfect sense here, Tanya, you try to include all the pieces in the attack, also opening up the position with d takes on c4. Considering that black cannot open up the d file, there's going to be rook d1 with a lot of consequences here. So I'm thinking moves like bishop e3, d takes on c4, knight e4. I think right now Magnus is looking for the kill.
And he's got about a minute to find it. To find the precise way forward that keeps the advantage, because the position is so beautiful for him. Black's pieces lack complete coordination. He decides to open up the lines, takes on c4, and I'm expecting him to do some rerouting of his pieces. Magnus has this incredible ability to place his pieces on the right squares.
I think bishop e3. No, knight e2. All right. Makes also perfect sense.
A lot of sense. If you get to take it, open up the D line, that king on D7 will get checkmated. It's been a scary story for Alireza's king on in the center of the board.
Maybe remove the bishop and play bishop G7.
How do you defend this position with 8 seconds on the clock?
Yeah, you have to bring the rook final in the game. Bishop G7 is essentially the only move that gives black some chances. So C4 has got to be moved for Magnus here, ripping apart the defenses here. C4 is played. Bishop G7 probably is also going to follow. I already see there could be some queen sacrifice here. C takes on D5 and D takes on C6. Looks very fancy. Maybe it's not necessary. Just play queen A2, but they just can't resist sacrificing the queen here. Can I do it? I mean, Magnus is sure tempted. Nah, he decided not to do it.
He instead plays a safer approach, queen a4, pinning that knight too much on the line to sacrifice your queen, and then you don't need to do it. It's such a beautiful position as is. Alireza's rook still where it started, hasn't made a single move, and that's what's making all the difference right now. 2 seconds on the clock and a very difficult position to hold. But we've seen miracles happen today.
Yeah, indeed. So Magnus is still needs to find a clear victory here. Did he miss bishop e2 here? No, he looks a bit nervous here. Rook b1 threatening rook b7. Alireza's fighting back.
And Magnus now under 5 seconds as well. Anything can happen. Anything can happen.
He's missing moves. He's also missing moves here. There's a lot of nerves. Queen f2 check here. What happens here? Oh,
he missed
my
it.
goodness.
Look at Magnus. He reacts. But Alireza misses something as well. Queen b7 on the board.
This is complete chaos, Tanya, here. Now, I think Magnus again is winning.
The bar is going up and down like my heart rate right now.
That's a mate. I think e6 is a checkmate on the board with a pawn. Bishop f8, queen g6. Where's the mate? Where's the mate? There's got to be a mate already here. Rook b7, it makes perfect sense at some point. Include the rook in the game. The players are playing basically in 5 seconds. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Alireza with 2 seconds. I don't even know how he's making these moves and staying alive right now. The knight comes on to defend. Queen f7 is a big threat. And Alireza, he resigns after e6. Magnus with his hands in the air. What a crazy match. What a crazy fight. In the end, the world #1 prevails in once again a fiery game of chess. Others, what a battle. But you can see Alireza, he's disappointed because